Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to the Hearthstone Weekly Show. Now for this week I'm continuing the sort of theme I established with the last non-spoiler weekly show, which was about ladder anxiety and sort of how to overcome it as you can improve yourself as a player. Now, for this episode I'll be going over two concepts, or actually more accurately one concept but two parts, that pretty much every successful deck builder uses, whether they realize it or not. Everyone goes through this thought process, they just don't really put a definition to it, which so I am. Now, I'm talking about power versus synergy. Now, if you've played games like Magic, you probably have heard those terms before, but basically, synergistic cards are cards that are below the standard power level. Unless they're in a combo, then they're more powerful than the standard power level. Power cards are cards which are always good on their own. So examples of this, synergistic cards are Mech Warper, Blast Mage, Twilight Drake, Mountain Giant. These are synergistic cards. Shrinkmeister, all synergy cards. Then on the other side of things, you've got power cards. So the classic one from, classic base set is Chillwind Yeti. Then you've got Loatheb, Sludge Belcher, and Dr. Boom being sort of the new ones. And you've got things which sort of vary between depending on the deck. Like Piloted Shredder is usually a power card, but then in mech decks, he is a power card, but he goes slightly into the synergy side of things because of his creature type. So there is a little bit of gray zone, but most things lean in one direction or the other a little bit more. Shredder being one of the big sort of gray zone cards. So, what does this have to do with deck building? Well, as some people may have noticed, not every deck is a synergy deck. I mean, if you look at the metagame right now, for example, even some decks which aren't played that much, you've got Mech Mage synergy deck, Handlock is a synergy deck. But then on the other side of things, you've got Paladin, which is mostly a power deck with a few synergies. You've got all types of different Druid decks are power decks. Priest is a synergy deck, you've got Warrior, which is a power deck, Face Hunter is a power deck. So basically the point is that you've got decks that have synergies that are more powerful when they work, but then you have the more consistent power decks, which are just more consistent and as a result have that increased win rate. So overall it balances out entirely. Now the reason why synergy decks are less consistent is because if you have multiple different types of synergies in your deck, then the chances of you getting that synergy is reduced. Now this can be seen most often in Priest. In fact, this is one of the reasons why Priest has been rather bad for most of Hearthstone's history. Priest has a lot of ridiculous 2-card combos, or 3-card combos. The problem is drawing them. Like Orkanai Soul Priest, Circle of Healing. Very powerful combo, but for a combo to be consistently powerful, one side or both sides need to have utility on their own. Orkanai Soul Priest does in some situations. Circle does in a very small amount of situations. So as a result, usually people will have to wait for both. So if you draw the Circle, then you're kind of stuck with a dead card in your hand. But if you draw the Orkanai, you can still use it. It's just nowhere near as good as it would have been. This is also evident with Shrinkmeister and Cabal. Ridiculous combo. You only draw one. It's fine if it's the Cabal, not so much if it's the Shrinkmeister. So it's that kind of thing which sort of brings down Priest combos a lot in terms of consistency. So if that's the case, then why aren't all the decks power decks? Now about half of them are, but they have increased consistency. However, they can't compete with the synergy decks when they work. When you get that God draw, the synergy decks are usually just roll them straight over. The question is, how do you balance out the consistency if you want to build a synergy deck? How do you balance out the consistency to make up for the fact that you're playing a less consistent deck? Now, there are a couple ways of doing this. The first way is adding power cards into your deck to stabilize it. Now, this is seen in things like Handlock, where you add Sludge Belcher into your deck, or any tempo decks that are running synergy engines will be running Loatheb, for example, which is a solid card, maybe Sludge Belcher. Even just any solid cards. Piloted Shredder functions like this in a lot of decks. Dr. Boom for some added late game, things like that. Just power cards to sort of smooth out the consistency. However, there is another way this happens, which is engines. Now, a card engine, or more accurately a synergy engine, is basically a whole bunch of synergies that have overlap and are held together by a couple of cards that act as a sort of glue. Now, this can be seen in two decks primarily, which is Mech Mage, where you have this sub-theme of mechs, and they're held together by tribal synergies. You got Mech Warper, Blast Mage, and then things like Tinkertown Technician, the Triple T. Different guy beginning with T, different gnome. And then some of them playing Cogmaster, things like that. So you have all these synergies, but then you also have all these mechs. Now the reason why the mech deck can get away with it so much is because they can run a very complete engine. Most of their deck is the engine. But that's because some of the mechs function as power cards as well. You've got Spider Tank, Shredder, even things like Yeti can be classified, and Harvest Golem can be classified as these. So there are a lot of mechs which sort of help smooth it out on their own. However, the deck still runs things like Dr. Boom and Antonidas to make use of the spare parts in Antonidas' case and just balance it out so you actually have an extra bit of punch. Same with Dr. Boom, gives you another way of winning if you get knocked off the board, which is what a lot of onboard synergy decks have problems with. Now, the other major one that people will know about in terms of engines is Handlock. Now, I used to call this the Shields Up engine, and I still kind of do, although I don't think I've said it out loud in a while. Basically, that engine is comprised of taunt givers and taunt receivers. Now, normally a Handlock would just be Molten Giants, Mountain Giants, and Twilight Drakes. You just lower your health and then increase your card count. But you can't do it that way because you're relying way too much on your opponent just being a goldfish and swimming around his bowl. So you need things like Sun Fury and Defender. Defender is worse than Sun Fury, but you need it to tie the engine together a little bit more. You find things with Anti-Heal Bot. Yes, you have Molten Giants, but it's not worth dying to play your Molten Giants. So you have to have these cards that sort of sew up the engine a little bit and make it into an actually moving part. But then they still have to increase their consistency with power cards like Sludge Belcher, as I said, Jiraxis to deal with the low health situations, just things like that. Things like Shadow Flame, for example, power cards that help you get to the late game. So that you can play your Jiraxis, you can play these Moltens, and it just lets the engine tick over. Now, on the other side of things, you can decrease the consistency of a power deck by adding a combo to make it more powerful situationally. Now, this can be seen at its best when you compare Fast Druid and Ramp Druid. Now, Fast Druid without the double combo is a power deck. It's basically just ramp cards and threats. That is what it is. It is a ramp deck. However, you take out that top end, and then you add in 2 combos, and yes, they lower your consistency. I mean, you do die just from drawing the combo twice, and it just doesn't work. However, it does mean that you will win games that you had no right to win because that 14 damage is really handy. The other thing about Force of Nature combo which you need to keep in mind is that both halves have functions outside of the combo. Force of Nature is a good removal or burn spell. Savage Roar, again, removal or burn spell. This is actually necessary on both sides, otherwise this combo it wouldn't be as playable, is the point. Sometimes you only need one half. So as a result, when you draw 2, it's amazing, but when you draw 1, you can still make do with it. Now, it took a while for people to figure out sort of how many of each of the cards you wanted, because single combo, you don't have the combo nearly as much, but then the overall consistency of your deck is increased. So people are thinking, maybe you want 3 pieces, because you can still use them on their own, right? And that kind of worked, but I think it just ended up settling on 4 because they realized the decrease in consistency is worth the power it gives you, just in those situations. Now, on the flip side of things, you have Ramp Druid, which is literally saying, no, we're playing ramp spells, and the most consistent play a threat every turn game plan you can possibly see. You just play a threat every turn until your opponent can't deal with one, and then they die. That's basically how Ramp Druid works, and that's the most obvious power deck, basically in existence, that has ever existed. Now, something to note is that when you're building a deck, you need to figure out, what am I basing it on? Now, this can be a couple of different things. You can think, am I basing it on synergies? Am I basing it on just an archetype that I can use power cards for? Again, people don't think about this. Like, they don't realize they're thinking about it, but just next time you make a deck, think about it. It's like, you make a deck and you think, I want to make a Mech Mage. You just decided to make a synergy deck. You may not realize it, but you just decided to make a synergy deck. And then the true deck building comes from figuring out how much you can lean on that synergy. The same goes the other way around, where you're thinking, I want to build a power deck, even though you didn't really sort of say it out loud. You say, I want to build a power deck, I'm going to build Control Warrior. And then you think, wait a second, I can add some combos in here. I can add Grommash, and I can have these cool Taskmasters that give me a whole bunch of extra punch from a combo, but it also means I have this extra 8-drop in my deck. So how did that deck revolve around making sure I can play all these powerhouse cards like Ragnaros, Alexstrasza, Barongeddon, Boom, things like that? It did it by slowing itself down so that the consistency drop isn't as noticeable. Because you're playing high drops, you're trying to get these powerhouse cards out that combo really well together, but you need to draw them and you need to play them later on. So the rest of the deck sort of revolves around that concept, and as a result, Grommash combo will kill a lot of people. 12 damage will end a lot of games for a Control Warrior. But if you notice, it's the same thing as Force of Nature Savage Roar. It will end a lot of games. However, you don't need it to end a lot of games, because you still have those powerhouse cards on their own that can just end the game on their own, just by beating them in the face. So that's how power decks will try and integrate these synergies into their own builds, and it's actually where a lot of deck building decisions come from, and a lot of where the card differences come from. It's basing on consistency versus power increase to try and figure out, and I realize saying power increase, considering I'm talking about power based cards, is confusing, but anyway, so basically the balance comes from reducing consistency to increase your overall situations where you can win, and you need to figure out which tweak increases your win rate the most. What's interesting about Hearthstone and card games in general is that this will change from week to week because the metagame shifts, which means you can get away with more or less. Now, that means you can increase the speed of your deck or slow it down. If the metagame slows down more, then if you're running just slight synergies, you can get away with them more, because when you draw dead, it's not as bad. But when the metagame speeds up, these engine decks start to take over because they have this massive 20-card engine that pretty much always draws well. Although you do still notice that it doesn't sometimes. Like, I have made the joke before that Mech Mage is sometimes just the Goblins and Gnomes deck, where you just draw your Blast Mages, your Tinkertown Technicians, and you just don't draw a mech. So that does exist. However, because the mech engine takes up so much room in the deck, those draws don't happen nearly as often. And that brings up tech cards like Unstable Portal. Unstable Portal is a very powerful card. However, there's an unwritten reason why some people don't use it. I would actually, when I say some people, I mean about 60% don't run it. Now, I quite like Unstable Portal. However, the reason a lot of people don't run it isn't because of the RNG, it's because it's not a mech. So as a result, it lowers the consistency of your deck quite dramatically, actually, because you're relying on an RNG card as well. But it lowers your engine size, it lowers the consistency of your deck, and you need to figure out, did I gain enough in terms of just, hey look, it's a raw power card, because that's what Unstable Portal is. Did I gain enough in terms of just saying, hey look, it's a powerful card, when I lost part of my engine? Now, in the case of engine decks, usually that doesn't work, but in the case of sort of weird synergy decks, that usually does. Now, there are examples of synergy decks that are not engines, but have overlapping synergies. An example of this is Oil Rogue. Oil Rogue is not an engine deck. It is a lot of just slightly overlapping synergies. They're not like with Mech Warper, which synergizes with 15 cards in the deck. It's not that overlapped. However, you've got things like Blade Flurry, which work with Spell Power, Oil, and Deadly Poison. So as a result, you will most likely have something to use your Blade Flurry with. However, they won't always happen. So that deck is made effective by being tied together with power cards. This was the same with Miracle Rogue. It was based around the Leroy synergy before it was nerfed. It was based around Leroy and Gadgetzan. However, it was still held together by things like Violet Teacher and Edwin Van Cleef, just powerful cards. Azure Drake. You needed these in your deck to make them more consistent, and it just makes things smoother. So you have to include these kinds of cards in your deck, and that's why you can't just go completely out of the way with just saying, I'm going to build a combo deck, I'm going to go for it. Look at Freeze Mage. Freeze Mage is a synergy deck based around one synergy. Alexstrasza, or Antonidas, or both, So I guess one or two synergies depending on the build. It's based around Alexstrasza or Antonidas, and a lot of burn spells. However, you need to draw them. So basically, the deck was saying, hey guys, we've got one synergy we're trying to focus on here that will kill almost anyone, minus a warrior, will kill almost anyone. However, the problem is that because it has no overlap, it's so inconsistent that we need to figure out a way of getting there. So that's when Doomsayer and the Secrets and Mad Scientist come into things to just kind of secure things. Now, Mad Scientist is in a weird gray zone where he's a synergy card, but he's also a power card at the same time. Because you don't need the combo in your hand, it comes from your deck as well, so as a result, he's kind of so consistent that he goes into a power card instead of a synergy card, which is weird. But that is most noticeable, actually, is that Mad Scientist is one of those cards where he fits in almost every mage deck and almost every hunter deck. Why is that? Because you can play secrets. I know Paladin can as well, but their secrets might as well not exist in some situations. So mage and hunter can play secrets, and a lot of them are quite powerful. So why wouldn't you just play this 2-drop that your opponent has to deal with, and the secret it gets while you're fiddling around with your game plan? That's why Mad Scientist is so powerful, because he just buys you time to get out of these situations, and he makes the consistency of your own deck better. So that's the kind of decision making that you need to think about when building a deck. So yeah, basically, sum up, when you're building a deck, you need to think, do I want to build synergy deck, do I want to build power deck? That's your basis. You decide what you want to do, and then if you have a synergy deck, you have to decide which one do I want to base it on, and then how many power cards do I want to include on this? Do I want to make it into an engine? Do I want to just have a lot of overlapping synergies slightly? And therefore, how many consistency boosting cards can I get away with that are just good on their own? Now, when you want to build a power deck, this is where the archetypes come in. Because synergy decks, yes, when they're finished, they fit into an archetype, like Mech Mage is an aggro deck. However, when the first person was designing Mech Mage, it wasn't really supposed to be, hey look, I'm going to build an aggro mech deck. It was just, what's sort of the best way of building a mech synergy deck, and it fit into aggro in the end. However, when you're building a power deck, you need to think, which direction do I want to take this in? Because there's a lot of options. So in the case of Druid, they're more mid-rangey, and less control-y, less aggro, very sort of mid-rangey in the middle. So you're thinking, what does this class excel at? Ramp cards. Therefore, I can get away with 4 and 5 drops, and a lot of them. So you build this mid-range deck. In the case of things like Tempo Mage, Tempo Mage has a lot of synergies in it. However, it is at its heart a power deck. What do I mean by that? So the synergies it has are basically Secrets and Curantor. As my camera appears to have stopped, so let's just turn that back on. That was weird. Anyway, so basically, you've got Curantor Mage and Secrets in Tempo Mage. That is your synergy because it's really strong when it works. But Curantor is also decent when it doesn't work. You just would not play it. But when it does work, it's really good. But you can get away with it because you're building a deck that has basically velocity, where you're just playing more and more tempo cards that give you more and more free mana, like Curantor and Mad Scientist, and as a result your opponent can't keep up and you just sort of keep whacking him in the face and he dies. However, if you look at all the cards in there, they're all designed to be super powerful so that your opponent has to individually deal with them and he can't force you off the board. And when he does force you off the board, you can still get back on there with a Flame Strike, for example, which is something that synergy decks would not have access to. That's why Mech Mage usually loses if you just throw it off the board, because it's very difficult to get back on the board when you're relying on an engine that involves onboard mechs. So in the case of Tempo Mage, you have comeback mechanisms because the individual power level of all your cards is very high, but they don't work together nearly as well. It's really Secrets and Curantor, but you're playing that because it's a powerful combo, not so much because it synergizes with the rest of your deck. So, I mean, I love tempo decks. It's not like I'm saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's how it works. Now, another way of looking at this is you've got control decks, or usually power decks, although in some cases they're synergy decks, like with Freeze Mage, where the deck was designed to protect the combo, not the combo designed as a win condition. It's kind of, because control mages are different from freeze mages for that reason. It was the same with Miracle Rogue. It was control rogue with a ridiculous damage combo, when in reality the combo was come up with, and the Gadgetzan synergy was come up with, thinking, what can we do with this? Oh look, Leroy's there. We can kill them with 18 damage, but we need to get there. So Gadgetzan, bunch of drawing, and you just protect yourself and it's a control deck. So basically, power decks, you need to figure out an archetype before you do something. With synergy decks, you need to think of a theme that work together and then go there, and then you can sort of intertwine these concepts a little bit to increase consistency in the case of adding power cards, or decrease consistency and add explosiveness in the case of synergy cards. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below. And if you have any ideas for stuff you want me to go over, because this seems to be something that I'll do on and off, I guess, just going over things to help people improve as players, put that in the comments and I will have a look at them and see sort of whether or not I can do an entire episode on them, and if I can, I will. So anyway, as for now, this is Jotto, signing off.